It's November of 2004. A body was found charred beyond recognition in the back of a burnt-out minivan. The victim was 48-year-old Laurie Waterman, and her daughter Rachelle Waterman was soon accused of conspiring with two others as being responsible for her death. Rochelle's cohorts, Jason Arrant and Radel, were the first to come under scrutiny by police, and they quickly confessed to the murder, implicating Rochelle as being involved with the planning of this crime. This video will take a look at the court case which was held to judge whether Rochelle was guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, or was she just another victim of two men who were out of control. The town of Craig is the largest on Prince of Wales Island, 55 miles off the coast of Alaska. The island itself is home to around 6,000 people, and Craig holds 1,500 of these residents. Most people know each other or know of each other, and it's not the sort of place where outsiders just pass through, as it's only reachable by ferry or a small plane. Rachelle Waterman was raised on this island from her parents Doc and Laurie Waterman. Her dad, Carl, aka Doc Waterman, was a real estate broker and president of the Craig, Alaska School Board. Her mother, Laurie, was widely loved in the community, and by all accounts, everyone spoke highly of her. She worked as a special education teacher's aide, and she spent a lot of her time volunteering with her church and other civic groups. Rochelle, from all reports, led a very normal life. She would compete in softball and volleyball tournaments, was part of the academic decathlon team, and was a talented singer in the school choir. She was a very intelligent young girl, mostly scoring A's and the occasional B, and was noted to be very articulate in both her reading, writing, and speech. In her teenage years, she developed a rebellious streak and would clash with her mother on a range of personal differences. One of these was her new interest in Wiccan, much to her religious mother's disdain, and she would wear nothing but black with accessories like spiked dog collars. It is reported that Rochelle is a victim of sexual assault that occurred when she was 13 years old, but the person involved was never charged, and both of her parents didn't know about this attack. She would only speak of it later in interviews with a criminal psychologist after her mother's murder. At some point in her early teens, Rochelle would start a blog titled My Crappy Life. Although most of her posts have been removed now, it is noted that she would write entries relating to how much she hated life in Craig. Some examples of her posts are, quote, "I am nothing. I am not who I was created to be. I have become who they wanted me to be. My crappy life. The inside look of an insane person. Location, Hell, Alaska. Well, I just wanted to let everyone know I haven't been online because I am grounded for getting 89% on a math test. And I have computer restrictions because the parental units found my Wiccan books." End quotes. Around this stage of Rochelle's life, she would begin to divulge to her friends that her mother was abusing her.
Now, when you were with Ms. Waterman, and particularly when Mr. Radel or Mr. Arrant was around, or both, did she ever talk about her mother?
Yes, she talked about her. I believe she might have said, like, I wish my mother would die or something, but I assumed it was normal teenage angst.
Okay. Did she talk about what her mother would do to her?
Yes, she said her mother beat her, called her fat.
Okay. Did she go into any more details than that?
She may have. I don't recall anything specific.
Okay. How many times did she mention this about? Frequently, every now and then? Or?
Every once in a while.
Okay. And what does you remember her specifically telling you?
I think she had something on her wrist, being like, Brad, but, I'm not really sure.
But I mean, how did she say her mother injured her?
I think she grabbed her like this or something.
Okay. Did she ever say anything about stairs?
Yeah, I remember the stairs.
What about that?
She said her mother pushed her down the stairs or shoved her or something.
She would talk about how her mom thought she was fat and would not feed her sometimes because she thought she was overweight. And I never really believed that. It wasn't just something.
Okay. And anything about getting beaten?
She would say some things about that sometimes, and it was just kind of like, that's not true.
Okay, what kind of things did she say about that?
She never emphasized on that, or she just kind of would say that I remember the stair incident.
Uh-huh.
She said that her mom had tried to knock her down the stairs.
Okay. But you never saw any injury?
No.
Okay.
She had told me that she would get grounded and that her mom wouldn't feed her, and that to me seemed entirely inaccurate.
Anything else?
She said that she got grounded for a B+ on a math test because a B+ wasn't good enough to her mom or something, and that didn't seem right either to me.
Okay. Did she say why her mother wasn't letting her eat?
Because she thought she was fat. That's what Rochelle said.
She would say things like her mother would ground her for getting bad grades in school, and she could be condescending sometimes.
Okay. What about eating? Did she say anything about her mother and eating?
Yes, she did. She said that her mother had put her on a diet where she was still allowed 3 meals a day, but she wasn't allowed just to go get snacks and things like that out of the refrigerator, the cupboards, and this.
Okay. Would she complain about her mother not feeding her?
Mm-hmm.
All right. What about any physical?
I do remember at one point, I don't remember exactly what was said, but Rochelle had said to me that her mother had pushed her, and I can't remember if she said she tried to push her down the stairs.
It would appear that there is a disconnect between what Rochelle was telling her friends and what they were actually witnessing. All of her friends that were interviewed said that they did not believe she was actually being abused, or that the abuse was to the extent that she said. Most of them would put it down to her just being dramatic, as she didn't like the punishment that her mother would dish out to her. This punishment was generally restrictions like a grounding or limited access to her computer. Laurie's husband, Doc Waterman, and her best friend, neighbor, and godparent to Rochelle, Lorraine Pierce, would give extensive character testimony that Laurie was never violent with her daughter, and in fact was severely concerned for the direction that she thought that Rochelle's life was going in.
I don't recall any physical discipline. I may have paddled her when she was quite young. I don't think that's very effective as they age.
Well, I was just talking about 2003, 2004.
No.
Now, when your wife, Laurie, would discipline her, in that period of 2003, 2004, how would she discipline her?
The minor discipline, sometimes she'd tell me, and sometimes it was the same thing. Sometimes it was a restriction or something of that nature. That would be the typical punishment for either one of us. But we didn't always discuss minor discipline.
Okay. What about major discipline?
Major discipline, she would come to me and ask me to be the enforcer.
Okay, that's when you put the restrictions on her.
I'm sorry?
That was when you would put the restrictions on her?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you ever see her, during that period of time, 2003, 2004, did you ever see her physically hit or strike Rochelle?
No.
Did Rochelle ever say anything to you during that time, 2003, 2004, that her mother hit her or threatened her?
No.
Did anybody else tell you that?
No.
Laurie had called and asked us to be godparents, and it was a true honor, and we accepted gratefully. And then we found out that the church wouldn't let us be because we weren't Catholic. So on paper, her true grandparents are listed as godparents, but we are the godparents of heart.
You said that, from what you could see, Rochelle's relationship with her mother was typical of a teenage daughter with her mother. What do you mean by that?
They had their little squabbles, and they had their good moments too. They shared things like going to honor choir, and Laurie chaperoned, and she was very proud of her daughter. And then there were times where she wished that Rochelle wouldn't act the way she did or date the boys she did. And I know they had little squabbles over it and major discussions. Laurie was very concerned about Rochelle's recent behavior. She felt that she was depressed.
Was there anything that you ever saw when you dealt with Rochelle, when you talked with her or anything like that made you think she hates her mom?
I would say not hates her mom, but she was very argumentative at the time, even with little things that didn't seem to us adults as needing an argument.
Would you agree that that's fairly typical for teenagers? They don't like the rules that their parents give?
Typically it is.
In the months leading up to Laurie's death, there was one main point of tension between her and her daughter. His name was Jason Arrant, a 24-year-old military dropout who now worked as a janitor at a school nearby and who had recently begun to date 15-year-old Rochelle.
Laurie was very concerned that Rochelle was dating, first of all, a much older man, and secondly, she was concerned that Jason might not have much of a goal in life, and she was very concerned that her daughter would become involved to the point of marrying somebody who would not help her realize her potential.
Okay. And I get Laurie talk to you about this?
Yes.
The two had met through Rochelle's former boyfriend, Brian Radel. 24-year-old Brian owned a computer repair shop on the island called Dark Wolf and would host Dungeons & Dragons nights where a group of his friends would come and play, Rachelle and Jason being amongst this group.
We did play Dungeons & Dragons for a while.
Okay. And what's Dungeons & Dragons?
It's a paper and pencil role-playing game.
Okay, so it's not like a computer or a video game?
No.
Okay. Did you all do different roles, or did you all basically use the same type of roles?
Different roles.
Okay. Did anybody have any favorite roles they wanted to do?
I believe that Brian preferred warriors.
Okay.
And I think Rochelle preferred the stealthier.
The what?
The stealthier roles.
Okay. Jason have any particular?
Jason, I think he preferred spellcasters, but he varied.
This is a minor observation on my part, but as the court case unfolded, I found it interesting to take note of the roles that the three charged conspirators would play, as John Wilburn just mentioned, in relation to the accused roles that they played in the murder. Brian's shop would not stay open for long, and in the wake of losing his business, he would opt to live in his boat. Hollis resident Lee Edwards took pity on Brian and offered him a place to live.
My son sent me a computer, and I was looking for somebody to help me set it up, and so I went down looking for him, and he was living on an old boat. He'd lost his business.
Okay.
Through some bad deals, I guess.
So what did you do?
Well, the way I was raised, when you meet somebody that doesn't have a coat, doesn't have any shoes, and you're supposed to help them if you can, and this guy was in November, there's a little snow on the ground. He's in a pair of flip-flops walking around down on the dock down there and no coat. So I bought him a coat, got him some shoes, and I was putting a water system in, so I told him if he'd come out and help me that I would give him $100.
Okay. So did he come out?
He came out to my house. I took him out there.
Okay. And then what happened?
I'm going to help him get back on his feet if I could,
Despite her mother's disapproval, Rochelle's relationship with Jason continued. The two decided to keep it a secret from the public, so that word couldn't get back to Laurie Waterman. Rochelle would begin to sneak out of her basement window at night to meet with him, and they would spend weekends together on Brian's boat. For the most part, the two would communicate online via email and messengers, and also through sending letters to each other that would be delivered by John Wilburn.
To characterize them, they're basically fantasy letters about what is going to happen in the future, and there's graphic sexual fantasies in there. There's graphic violent fantasies in there. There's discussion of how often Jason Arrant uses drugs, discussing being stoned while he's writing and playing video games and things. There's over and over a discussion of sex and drugs. There's a discussion of how Laurie Waterman was planning to sell Rochelle, and Arrant was talking about maybe he could buy Rochelle for $100,000. He discusses downloading porn for a juvenile, John Wilburn. He discusses talking with Brian Radel, saying that Brian scoring some major points, bonus points with him because everything he does is an effort to get you and me together. He talks about having sex with Rochelle. He talks about having imaginary conversations with her. He talks about her ex-boyfriends. Again, there's just a lot of sexual fantasy, a lot of violent fantasy.
Throughout her relationship with Arrant, Rochelle would tell him of the abuse that she faced at home.
At some point, did Ms. Waterman tell you about some problems she was having with her mother?
Yes.
And when did she start telling you about those?
She told me about those just shortly after we became sexually involved, because I was noticing some things on her body that shouldn't have been there, bruises and marks and other things, and I asked her about them.
Okay. And what did she tell you?
She told me that they were the results of abuse by her mother.
She was a very active girl, and not only in volleyball, but she'd play football with the boys down at the ballpark on the weekend. She had bruises nearly constantly.
Did she ever say that they didn't come from anything other than athletics?
No.
She said that she had been thrown down the stairs before. She had been struck with a baseball bat, been threatened with a knife.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else you can remember?
As far as physical abuse, no.
Okay. How many times did she tell you about this?
Oh, several.
When she told you about this, what was your response to her?
Well, my first response was that I wanted to help her.
Okay. And did you tell her how you wanted to help?
I asked her how I could help.
What did she say?
Well, she said that she had already spoken with the police before on a previous occasion, because I had suggested that. And then we spoke about perhaps getting her emancipated so she could get away from the situation, but nothing really came of that. I made the suggestion that I could even just pack up everything I had and we could both leave and get away from it.
Okay.
And she always kind of had a reason that none of those would work. And finally I said, well, what is it that you want me to do?
Okay.
And she said that she thought it would be better if her mother wasn't around anymore.
Did you ask her what she meant by that?
Well, yes.
And what was her response?
That she thought it would be better if her mother was dead.
And what was your response?
Well, I was obviously trepidatious about it, but I loved her, and I already told her that I would do anything for her.
Okay.
And so at that point, I decided that I needed to enlist some help.
Okay.
How long had you known Jason?
Since we were both 16.
Were you friends, or was it deeper than that?
Blood brothers. And for me, I was raised, an oath is an oath, you keep it. And to me, that meant anything that was mine was his. I mean, he could ask for the shirt off my back, my money, my boat, and sometimes he did ask for stuff like that. If he asked for something, I'd be there for him.
Brian would testify that although Jason discussed the murder with him frequently, he did not take it seriously at all.
I just really didn't think it was going to happen. I thought it was just a harebrained thing with him being defensive at that point.
Defensive about Rochelle?
Yes.
Not being able to see her, or just protective, or what?
Protective. I felt he was very protective of people. I kind of typified him like me. Yes, I've killed a woman, but I'm very protective of women and children, and would do anything to protect them. Up to that point, I just kind of assumed it'd be stepping in front of a bullet or something, but I felt that he was the same way. So I felt he was very protective of Rochelle, not because of the relationship, but because of her being a young woman.
You said you seemed like kind of a harebrained scheme. Why?
I just didn't see Rochelle ever saying yes to it. I mean, it was, she didn't like war, she didn't like killing. I mean, when he told me she'd said yes, it flabbergasted me.
Over time, Brian would be worn down and begins to consider the murder.
I felt responsible that if I waited, and I mean, Jason even brought it up to me that if I didn't do something, and something happened to Rochelle, I was responsible for that. If she got hurt, if she got killed, that it would be my fault. And so I decided to go along with it.
You talked about how you were raised that an oath is an oath. Can you describe what it was like as you were being raised?
Very religious, lots of discipline.
What kind of discipline?
Physical.
Describe that for me, please.
Switches.
Wait, what do you mean by switches?
Like berry bushes, cedar branches, whatever, thin, whippy pieces of wood. 1x4s, 1x2s, broom handles, rubber hoses, hands, not too many fists, mainly an open hand if that ever happened, but that was rare. Basically, my parents believed in the verses that say, spare the rod, spoil the child, that you didn't stick children in corners, you didn't do things like that. That was just not the way to go.
There's a big difference between a wooden spoon and a rubber hose, don't you think?
I thought that, but at the same time, I grew up in that. I thought it was wrong, and I tried to express it, but I usually just...
Made it worse?
Yeah. And there had been wooden spoons at one point. It graduated to a metal spoon eventually, after the wooden one broke.
So, how did that make you react when Jason was telling you that Rochelle was being beaten by her mother?
I have a major problem with people who abuse their children. It's just something that I don't like. And I was imagining what it was like for me. I thought about what it'd be like in her situation. I felt her situation was worse than mine because of the things that she'd related to me and then things Jason had been telling me. And I felt if it was that bad for me, how much worse can it be for her? As I told Jason, I felt someone's life had to be in jeopardy and there had to be no other options. And that's what I originally told him. It wasn't until he ended up telling me that Laurie had threatened Rochelle's life, and while I was kind of iffy on the subject, I just didn't see any reason that he'd lie to me about something that serious.
Did you not see any reason why he would lie to you because you were blood brothers?
There was that, but I thought he was a good person. I thought that, he wouldn't lie about something like that.
Brian says that the final straw to getting him on board was confirmation that Arrant had personally witnessed the abuse. Brian would testify that Arrant claimed one night, whilst he was chatting with Rochelle via webcam, her mother walked into the room and attacked her with a baseball bat. Because Jason said he witnessed this, and Brian had no reason to believe that he was lying to him, that was the tipping point. Around about the same time that Jason initiated his sexual relationship with Rochelle, communications with Rochelle and Brian would come to a halt. For almost the entirety of the months leading up to the murder, Brian would have no contact with Rochelle, and all information regarding that she wanted her mother dead came exclusively from Jason.
Do you regret not talking to Rochelle after roughly the 20th, 25th of August, 2004?
I regret most of it. I regret helping Jason get with her in the first place. There's a lot of things I wish I had done and hadn't done.
Is one of those that you wish you had talked to Rochelle?
Even at the end, I could have gone down there and talked to her and asked her, what's up, is this really true? But I just didn't think Jason would lie, and he had been informing me that Rochelle didn't consider me a friend. He said that she was afraid to be in the same room with me, and he'd been telling me this from, I'd say, September, from when he got together with her, and that he was working on her to try to get her to like me again. And
now this was after he says that she had said yes?
No, it was before the shop closed that he started telling me about the friendship thing, about that.
That she didn't consider you a friend?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll put that up here.
And I mentioned that it didn't seem to match up with reality. I mean, she talked very personally with me about wanting to get with Jason. Mm-hmm. She'd gone down on the beach alone with me to just talk to me on 4th of July. It seemed to me like we were good pals, but I felt maybe that was just aberrations, or she was feeling good that day or something. And
Just to be clear, when you said you felt that you were good pals with Rochelle?
Yeah.
Okay, and so what Jason was telling you and what was happening with Rochelle were two separate things.
Yeah. But I felt he wouldn't lie to me about that, so I just felt that I must have assumed wrong about where Rochelle and I were at as friends. And so it just made it where I really didn't want to go talk to her. I was afraid in some ways to go talk to her.
So Jason was doing what he could to keep you away from Rochelle.
Looking back on it, that's what I think was happening.
A pattern emerges of Jason isolating Rochelle from a number of people in her life. As a 6-foot-tall, 24-year-old man, he threatens male friends that she has, who are all between the ages of 14 and 15, and would even develop a problem with John Wilburn, his very friend that helped him deliver letters back and forth. Anyone that was close to Rochelle, Jason seemed to have a problem with them. Brian Radel would attempt to present a number of solutions to Jason for Rochelle's abusive situation, as he wanted murder to be the last case resort. He would propose hidden video cameras in Rochelle's house to capture the abuse on tape, so that they could present this evidence to Child Protective Services. Jason had been telling him that CPS wouldn't believe them if it was just Rochelle's word against her mother's. Every idea that was brought to the table was rejected for one reason or another, and with no more options, they began to plan how the murder would take place. The two would discuss many ideas on how they could kill Laurie. Some of these included sailing her out into the ocean and putting a tub of cement around her feet, then sinking her to the seabed. They talked about shooting her whilst she collected Rochelle from school one day, planting explosives under her vehicle, or even cutting the brake cable. Most of the plans were deemed not viable for a range of reasons, yet two of the plans had actually come rather close to execution prior to her actual death. Sometime in September, Brian was to break into the Waterman residence as Doc wasn't home and was going to kill Laurie with a knife. At the last minute, Brian refused this plan, as it turned out there were guests at the Waterman residence, and Brian did not want the possibility of anyone else getting hurt. This refusal angered Jason very much, and they worked to reschedule another time for the murder. A week later, Brian sat in his vehicle with a rifle, waiting for Laurie to exit the school, as he planned to shoot her in the head from a distance. Brian claims that he had forgotten a screw for the rifle, and it was unable to fire, so the murder never took place that day. After this second failed attempt, Jason told Brian that Rochelle called him and wanted to call the killing off, as things between her and her mother had been getting better. She was no longer interested in her mother dying, and so the plan was called off. Brian testifies that the two would hang out as they normally would after this. They would talk about everyday things and play video games. Sometime in mid-October, Rachelle Waterman gets grounded by her mother, and all access to her communications devices are restricted. She is no longer able to get in touch with Jason on a regular basis, and when she does contact him, Radel testifies that she thought it might be a good idea for them to put their relationship on hold and wait until she's 18 to continue it.
He seemed to be getting worried that he was going to lose his relationship with Rochelle. He expressed to me that he was afraid that if he waited, which was that him and Rochelle, he told me over this probably about 3-week period, that had been discussed about waiting until she was 18, when her parents couldn't create a problem, couldn't say that she couldn't be with Jason. And he expressed to me that he was afraid that if he waited that long, she wouldn't want to be with him anymore.
So during this time, from what you understand, Rochelle is the one saying, we should wait until I'm 18.
Essentially, that was, Jason didn't really seem to want to wait till 18. There was definitely no desire on his part to wait till then.
Shortly after this, Jason comes to Brian once more and tells him that Rochelle could be in some serious trouble, that her life is in imminent danger. He believes that she will either commit suicide, her mother will kill her, or she will kill her mother. And he wants to put an end to all of this abuse once and for all on the weekend of November 13th, as both Rochelle and Doc Waterman will be out of town. The two decide that the best course of action is to get Laurie drunk, and then to break her neck in a way that resembled a drunk driving accident. It's now the night of November 13th, 2004. Rochelle is over 600 miles away in Anchorage for a volleyball tournament, and Doc is away in Juneau for work. Laurie attends a Chamber of Commerce banquet in which she helped set up and clean afterwards. This event finished sometime around 9:30 p.m. on Saturday night. She then drives home in her purple minivan, changes into sleep attire, and goes to bed. Very soon after, Jason Arrant and Brian Radel drive towards the Waterman house. Jason drops Brian Radel off nearby and drives away to wait for him in a pre-planned location in the woods. Brian approaches the house on foot and quietly gains entrance through the basement using tools to break in.
Eventually, I ended up getting to Laurie's room, and the door was slightly cracked. I went to open it. Laurie Waterman apparently heard the door opening and came to it. I ran around the corner, and I heard the door open a little bit, and then a few seconds later it closed.
After she closed the door, what did you do then?
I stood at the door. I thought she'd seen me, so I figured she was probably calling the cops. Didn't hear any sirens, though. After a while, I probably stood there for about an hour and a half, debating going into the room.
An hour and a half, you waited there. You waited in the same location?
Yeah.
And were you standing, or were you sitting down? Or
I was standing.
Standing, okay.
I finally decided to go in, and so I opened the door. I rushed in. Laurie was laying face down on the bed. I went up to the side of the bed, put a rag over Laurie's head to gag her. She woke up. I'd placed my elbow in the middle of her back so she couldn't move. She started to cry.
How tall are you?
About 6'5".
And how much do you weigh?
277. I waited for her to stop crying. Eventually she did. I told her to put her hands behind her back. I bound her hands. I tied the back of the gag after she opened her mouth to bound her feet. Then I started looking around the room for clothes, looking in the cabinets.
How was she reacting to all this?
I don't know. It could have been anything, just terror or whatever. She just was doing it.
Okay. Was she crying?
No.
Okay. Now, after she got dressed, what'd you do then?
I took her down to the kitchen. I asked her to point out where her purse and her keys were. She pointed with her hands. Then I went and got a wine bottle. I took the gag off, undid her hands, asked her where the glasses were, wine glasses. She pointed it out, gave the wine glass to Laurie, filled it up, told her to drink. She drank. The bottle was probably maybe 2/3 full, and okay. She drank all of it.
Did she say anything during this time after you took the gag off her?
No, she didn't.
Now, how was she reacting?
She wasn't really reacting. She was just doing what she was told.
Had you made any threats to her?
I told her that I wouldn't hurt her if she cooperated.
Okay.
I went and took her downstairs, told her that we were going down to the van. Went down there, had her get into the back of the van, laid down on the back row of the seats, facing back, sideways, and then drove off.
After about 3 hours, I started kind of wondering what might have happened to him, so I started patrolling the road between the meeting point and back towards Gluoc. I would get about to the graveyard and then turn back around, and I went back and forth there about 3 or 4 times until I saw the minivan coming.
I flashed my lights, and then I passed him, and then I slowed down and stopped by the side of the road and waited for him to come up behind me.
Did he?
Yeah.
And then what happened when he pulled up behind you?
He got out. I got out. He came up, asked me if I had her.
He said, I've got her. And he pointed into the vehicle, and there she was, tied up. We both climbed back into our respective vehicles and drove out to the point where we were going to kill her.
When you got out to the area where you was going to do this, did he have to pull her out of the van or lift her out of the van?
Yes. Yeah, she was so inebriated at that time that she wasn't really capable of movement on her own.
Okay, how could you tell that?
Well, she just was very loose. Okay. She couldn't even hold her own head up.
All right. Then after he pulled her out of the van, what did he do next?
He held her up on her knees and stood behind her.
I attempted to break her neck.
How'd you do that?
By yanking up on the chin, forcing it back.
Okay. How far back did you pull her chin up? Her head back?
A ways, but...
Judge, can we take a break? Can we take a break, please? I'm sorry, we need to take a...
We'll go ahead and take a break, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Please remember the admonition, don't discuss the case with one another. Keep an open mind.
When you said you pulled her head back, did you jerk it back or were you pulling it steadily?
I tried to jerk, but I don't think, well...
I can't hear you.
I tried to jerk, but I don't think nothing happened.
Then he went for the movie approach.
Which
was just to grab the back of her head and her chin and twist.
And what do you mean by twist?
Turn the head around.
Okay.
To try to break it.
All right. And how far back did you get her head?
Easily 180 degrees.
Almost completely around?
Yes.
And did that break her neck or not?
I can't speculate whether the bones broke. I know she was still alive at that point. Then he laid her out on the ground.
Jason held her down for me. I karate chopped her in the throat.
With what?
The side of my hand.
How many times did you try to karate chop her?
Couple times.
Okay. And what effect did it have?
I couldn't tell any at that point. I wasn't sure. I wasn't really sure how you were supposed to do that if you're going to kill somebody that way. So.
Okay. So what'd you do then?
Jason had a flashlight. He handed it to me. I think I might have asked for it. I really wasn't paying. Well, he continued to hold her down.
Flashlight he had, was he holding it or did he have to go get it?
He had been holding it.
Okay.
And I struck her repeatedly in the throat.
And she was lying on the ground at this time?
Yes, on her side.
On her side? Okay. And where was he at?
He was standing behind her.
Okay. Was she doing anything when he was hitting her?
Aside from some various noises that I would care to forget. Not really, no. I think she was beyond struggle at that point.
And was she struggling or doing anything at this time when you were hitting her?
I really
didn't pay attention. Didn't look.
I was doing my best not to look.
Okay. How many times did you strike her in the throat with the flashlight?
At least a half dozen.
Okay. How hard were you hitting her?
As hard as I could. She did say something.
What was it? Could you make it out?
Said, "Can I ask a question?" But I think she was too delirious by that time to realize I would let her ask the question.
And did you answer?
I said, "What is it?" But she just kept repeating.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
So didn't say anything else then?
No, Jason said something, but I didn't say anything.
Do you remember what he said?
He crouched down in front of her and said something along the lines of, you won't ever effing hurt Rochelle again.
Then he just put his hands over her mouth and nose to cut off her air and waited.
It was taking a long time, so we took her, and she was still alive because I could hear her breathing, and stuck her in the van.
Okay.
She was rasping in the back of the van. I said that it took a little while, that eventually I stopped hearing her.
Breathing?
Yeah.
Okay.
We knew at that point that the car crash scenario would never work.
Okay.
Because the damage was completely inconsistent with it.
So came up with an alternate plan.
Yeah, just kind of on the fly.
The two now drive the minivan further into the woods down a beaten path, and in a panic, Brian would forget to put the handbrake on. The van, with Laurie's body in it, rolls off the road and down a steep hill, coming to a halt by crashing into a tree. They decide to burn the van and begin to douse it in gasoline. From the road above, they throw lit paper down into the vehicle and it slowly catches fire. From this point on, they leave the burning van and return to their homes at around 8 a.m. Sunday the 14th. The van is quickly discovered by law enforcement that very day.
It was still smoldering, or there was vapor coming off of it. The day was rainy and misty, and between 35 and 40 degrees, so you could see vapor coming from the car from whatever heat was there. I'm not sure whether it was smoke or just the heat coming up, but I could see bluish gray vapor coming from this car. It was about 50 feet down the hill. The hill was a very good slope with fallen timber, logs, stumps, dirt, grass, bushes. I looked inside and saw what appeared to be a human skull about in the middle of the van. It was in between the front seats and the back seats, and about in the midline of the car. And then there was a pile of remains there. It was blackened, charred. I could see some bones. I could see some other matter. I couldn't see any clothing. Couldn't see any hair. I couldn't tell whether it was a man, a woman, a child. It appeared to be human, but other than that, I couldn't say anything about it.
Okay.
Rumor begins to spread across the island that Laurie Waterman and her vehicle are missing, and a burning minivan that matches hers was found in the forest. Doc and Rochelle come home immediately, and even though official information is kept under wraps, the general feeling is that the burned body is Laurie. Doc Waterman is expecting the worst, but hoping for the best at this point, as nothing has been confirmed. The next day, while Rochelle is at school, the burned vehicle's VIN number comes back and confirms that the minivan belongs to Laurie. Chief C of the Craig Police Department wishes to inform Doc Waterman of this news personally. Even though the body has not been identified, he fears the worst and prepares to drive to his old friend's house. Before he does this, he first contacts the Waterman's neighbor and godparent to Rochelle, Don Pierce, and asks him to collect her from school, then bring her home to be present for when he delivers this news.
When I first went into the office, it was just Rochelle and I said, "Rochelle, we need to go home." And Rochelle told me, "I can't. I've called Jason." Right at that time, there was a knock on the door. I opened it up, and in walked Jason. And he walked over, gave her a hug, told her things were going to be all right. They sat down in the chairs that I had occupied, Rochelle in the chair she had occupied. We're holding hands. He was, trying to console her. Mr. Arrant confronted me, saying that she needed to be consoled and comforted. And I told her that told him that that's what I was going to do. I was going to take my goddaughter home so that she would be with her dad. I walked in with Rochelle to make sure that Doc was at home. I didn't want to leave her alone. As soon as I realized Doc was there, I realized that I had parked in Laurie's space in the driveway. And we had assumed the worst, but there was a chance that he was going to be bringing good news, and I didn't want to have the wrath of the wooden spoon. So I went and moved my truck over to my house, which is next door.
Okay. And was Chief C there?
It was shortly after that Chief C. In fact, I was walking back. Jason had pulled into the driveway and parked where I had been, and then Chief C pulled across the tail end of the driveway. At that point, Jason confronted Chief C about the fact that he needed to be included in the group of people that was consoling Rochelle and trying to make her comfortable. And Chief C arched his eyebrow and just said, "And you are," and Jason told him, and then Chief C and I went in the house and left Jason out in the driveway.
The news that the burned body is more than likely Laurie is delivered to Doc.
Were you there when Chief C told Doc Waterman that the VIN number on the van they had found matched his VIN number?
Yes, I was.
How did Doc take it?
He took it like a person that had been waiting for the other foot to fall all day. He was stoic about it, but his shoulders slumped. They still didn't have a positive identification of who was in the van. Mm-hmm. But Chief C did state that there was a body had been recovered in the van. It got rid of that speculation. So we still really didn't know that it was Laurie, but it was the other foot coming down.
How did Doc seem to take that throughout the next week?
Doc's a very brave man. He has faced many things in life that I wouldn't want to face, the Vietnam War being one of them. And our travels over the island that next week, we had talked about it, and he told me that it wasn't that he was going to be cold, it wasn't that he didn't want to care, but the only way that he could see getting past this was if he put it into survival mode like he had in the Vietnam War experience. That part of that experience he still had not dealt with, and it was going to take a long time for him to be able to get to the point where he may be able to deal with all of, Laurie's death.
The body is confirmed to be Laurie Waterman, and a homicide investigation is now in full swing. Jason Arrant is brought in for questioning as a suspect numerous times, and during one of these interviews he cracks a little. He lets police know that Brian was the one who killed Laurie, but without disclosing his full involvement, he says that he was just the driver and dropped Brian off and picked him up after the murder. There is also no mention of Rochelle's involvement during this first foray into the truth. Jason is asked to wear a wire and speak with Radel, which he does, and during this conversation, Brian takes the full blame, whilst Jason continues to try and minimize how involved he was. This was all pre-planned, as he and Brian had discussed that if the police were to become interested in them, Brian would take the fall. Both men are arrested, and another interview is conducted with Jason. During this interview, he would crack a little more and divulge the extent of his involvement, yet he would continue to refrain from telling them that Rochelle was involved at all. He tells police that he was in fact the mastermind behind it all, and was trying to save Rochelle from an abusive situation without her knowledge that he had planned it all. Sergeant Habib and investigator Randy McPherson did not trust that he had given them the full story, and so they conducted a third and final interview with him the following day. This interview was led by Sergeant Habib, and over the course of it, Jason implicates Rochelle as the one who ordered the kill. Jason and Rochelle's computers are seized and their homes are scoured for evidence. Letters and items of clothing are taken from both of their residents, and the investigators bring Rochelle in for an interview. After Rochelle's second interview, she admits that she is involved, but not to the extent that Jason says. She claims to have known about the murder plans from the start, but that things just spiraled out of control. She says that she initially did plan and discuss this with Jason, but then later decided that she did not want him to go ahead with it. Rochelle's behavior after she found out that her mother was murdered came under scrutiny, as many of her school friends testified that she seemed to not be affected by the news at all, as she still joked around with them and was in upbeat moods. She would even post on her blog in a matter-of-fact way, quote, "Just to let everyone know, my mother was murdered. I won't have computer access until the weekend or so because the police took my computer to go through the hard drive. End quote. Apart from her behavior post finding out about the murder and her confession that she knew the crime was being planned, there's very little physical evidence that implicates her in the plot. In fact, the only evidence that the police had was one email where Rachelle and Jason talk about a hunting trip. Jason tells the court that the hunting trip mentioned was a code for the failed plan to shoot her mother.
Wednesday, September 29, 2004, 12:34 p.m. Does that sound right?
Yes, it does.
It says here on the first paragraph, hi, how goes it? Not much going on here today. I went down and found Brian so I could chat at him for a bit. Oh yeah, and we canceled that hunting trip we were planning for today, but he said he'd like to go sometime soon, no later than a week from now, and swing it, so that should be fun. Now, what's this reference to?
The hunting trip was in reference to the failed attempt with the rifle.
At the end of the letter, what's this here, right here, you know?
Oh, well, no, I don't.
Okay.
That
last part that looks really strange, that's Russian. It means I love you.
Huh.
Is that?
Yes.
Okay. I couldn't help but slip it in there. I figured the odds of your mom speaking or even recognizing Russian were pretty remote. I knew you probably wouldn't know what it was either, but I just couldn't close my mail to you with a see you later, pal handshake kind of deal, so I improvised. And then there's a wink again.
Yes.
All right. I'll be so glad when this whole thing with your mother is over. I know it's not like I'm going to be able to see you right away, probably, but at least you'll be safe. Dad, and to be perfectly honest, all this waiting and planning and thinking about it is stressing me the hell out. It'll all be worth it in the end, and I know that, but it's just starting to kind of feel kind of overwhelming. I don't know, maybe I just need somebody to lean on for a bit. Hey, somebody, right? Is that a wink?
Yes.
If it couldn't be you, I wouldn't be anybody. What was that a reference to?
Which part?
The first paragraph. I'll be so glad when this whole thing with your mother is over.
Oh, with the whole thing with plotting to kill her.
Okay. And then you said, I know it's not like I'm going to be able to see you right away, probably. At least you'll be safe. What did you mean by that?
I figured that it would probably be safest to keep my distance until things kind of calm down a little bit, just to keep from drawing suspicion.
After?
Right, like, if she ended up, if she was, suddenly dead and then we have an open relationship 3 days later, then people would wonder, obviously.
Rochelle's confession during her interrogation was a point of contention between the prosecution and defense, as they both painted it with very different strokes of the brush. Here is an excerpt from it.
I said, don't do anything. We've been getting along, and I just don't do anything. I don't want anything to happen.
But you knew it was planned, scheduled to happen.
I knew they were thinking about it. I didn't know if it was for sure.
Okay. And then what?
And then he, like I said, he said, you're just being over emotional, you're freaking out. And I said, no. And we just kind of got in this fight, and it just ended up with going, and I hung up on him.
So, what did the conversation leave you with?
It left me with me saying, no, don't do it.
So, it's Friday. You've got two guys who are plotting to kill your mother. You have a very ambiguous conversation with one of the conspirators. And yet, you don't do anything to stop this.
I thought they would understand. I didn't want it to happen. I thought he would listen to me.
Evidently they didn't, did they?
Evidently. I talked to him and I said, so we're okay. He said, yeah, we're fine. At first I thought I meant, oh, okay, everything's good. My mom's out cleaning up the Chamber of Commerce dinner or something. And then he said, it happened. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? He said, we did it. And I said, no, I told you I didn't want it to happen. And I was so horrified.
Okay. I believe it was Tuesday. We sat in this room together and talked for several hours. And you sat there and lied to me, didn't you? You knew who killed your mother, didn't you? On Sunday. You knew it had been done, and you knew they did it.
Why are you gonna rub it in my face?
Well, I'm trying to understand, okay, Rochelle?
I think you already know.
Well, like I said, there's still some unanswered questions. And, everybody's been lying to us, okay? Jason's lied to us, Brian's lied to us, he's lied to us. And that's to be expected, and we've worked our way through the lies. If you truly do love your mother, you owe it to her to tell us that.
You told them how to get into the house. You told them, listen to me, you told them you and your dad were going to be gone. And you told them when you and your dad would be back. Then you called to make sure it was done when you got back. Now you're sitting here telling us that you called them to stop it.
After some good cop, bad cop, Rochelle begins to talk.
He said he might use Brian. I wasn't sure for sure if not.
But I mean, you did approach him and say, I want you to kill my mother.
Not exactly directly. I just said, sometimes I just wish my mother wasn't here. She causes me so much pain.
Okay.
And he said, would you rather her dead? I said, I don't know. And it just kind of jumped around the bush.
But the gist of it was, yes, you did want her dead, and you wanted him to take care of it for you.
Yes.
Okay. So, from there, what happened?
Different ideas were discussed, and I didn't really have a lot to do with it.
I'm sorry, ideas were discussed?
Different ideas that Jason had.
Like scenarios for carrying this out. Okay.
Before I left for state.
This is last Wednesday?
Yes. Well, it was like a Tuesday or something. I was talking online. And he said, so you're going to be gone. Is your dad going to be gone? I was like, oh, well, yeah, he's, up in Juneau. He said, well, we might take care of your mother this weekend. And I said, wait, what? We didn't discuss, I wanted to just be told about things. And so I was kind of worrying about it over the trip. And then finally I called and said, we've been getting along lately, and I really don't want these things to happen. And he told me, I was being irrational, I was being emotional, that I'd thank him later.
So he's basically telling you, we're going to do it anyway, because we need it, you need it, it's good for you, it's going to happen.
That's what he told me, that it would be good for me.
And you're left with the impression he's probably going to carry it out anyway.
No, I thought he would listen to me. I said, because the very last thing I said was, no, don't do it. And he kind of said, fine. And I thought that meant he agreed, but I think it was kind of like a screw you kind of thing.
Well, don't you think it was pretty important to make sure that this was fully understood? Like I said, this is kind of a very ambiguous ending to a very important conversation.
I had tried to get a hold of him.
You called Mom and talked to her and everything's fine?
Yes. She's like, I'm going to Chamber of Commerce dinner, and
you didn't tell Mom nothing?
Didn't think it. I thought it was over.
The defense attorney, Mr. Wells, would have a difficult job laid out for him, and during the trial would engage a high-pressure cross-examination of Detective Habib, the man who interviewed Jason Arrant. During this cross, he would begin to build an image that the investigators had planted the idea in Jason's mind, that Rochelle was more involved in the crime than she actually was.
And you went on and you start on page 54, you say there's more to this shit. This isn't over. This is not over. There's still one more person out there running around free. You two have been scammed. You two have been scammed. Bottom line, what about Rachel? Right?
Yes.
Actually, her name isn't Rachel, is it?
Rochelle.
It's Rochelle. You've been investigating this for a week and you don't even know her name.
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
And then you go on and you say, that girl played you again. Top of page 56, right?
Yes.
So at this point, you have told Jason 5 times what you want him to say.
No, I've told him 5 times information that we believe to be true and that we were following up an investigation on.
You told him 5 times what you believe and what you want him to say.
I am not saying I want him to say that. I'm telling him information that we have to make him understand that we have more information in this investigation than he believes. I'm trying to give him an opportunity to start being completely honest with us. At that point in time, we did not feel he was being completely honest with us at all.
Mr. Wells would then continue his attack on the credibility of involved law enforcement by arguing that the investigator Randy McPherson drew a false confession from Rochelle, false in regards to the extent of her involvement. He would also point out that the investigators utilized high-pressure psychological interrogation tactics against her, tactics that are designed to make hardened criminals buckle, let alone a young adult age 16. He would state that using these techniques on a person of this age, although not illegal, is unethical to do so without a guardian or lawyer present.
And in fact, it's one of the things that you do in an interrogation is you get somebody away from other people, right?
Well, it's one of many reasons why we go to a police station. Primary reason we went down there, of course, is that a video camera that we could videotape the interview, where we could show Rochelle's response to questions, also show that we had nothing to hide, also record it, the entire interview. But yes, that is an aspect of why you take somebody down to a police station, get them into a small, secluded room away from things that would distract them, get them a sense, like a psychological sense of being isolated and alone, and then proceed with the interview.
You go on and you say, I mean, you know what was in your emails and chats and that stuff, and while you think it might not have been saved, actually it does get saved. And that information can be retrieved and we can read it. And that is just one example. And as you can see, we've got emails, chats. Right?
Yes.
At this point of the cross, Mr. Wells begins to list in great detail all of the possible evidence that is generally uncovered in cases where there is a conspiracy to kill. Evidence such as emails, hard drives, letters, and multiple witnesses who can corroborate that evidence. Yet in this case, out of everything recovered from all of the locations, there is almost nothing that physically links Rochelle to the murder. Mr. Wells goes on to paint the picture that Randy greatly intimidated her throughout the interview, which caused her to say what she believed that he wanted her to say.
You can, in fact, lie to somebody that you're interviewing, right?
Yes.
And, I mean, you lied a lot to Rochelle, didn't you?
Well, a lot's a relative term, but I did use deceit. I did tell her some lies.
Okay. Your goal in this was to get her to corroborate what Jason had said.
Again, my goal in the interview was to get her to tell me the truth.
You say that your goal was to get her to say the truth. You then accept what Jason Arrant says as the truth then, right?
What he told me, a lot of what he told me, we were able to collaborate. He went out to the scenes, he pointed things out. He showed us where some other evidence was that we didn't even know about, the secondary fire scene. His description of what happened matched the things we found at the burn scene, the description or the condition of the car, how the car fell down the hill unexpectedly. There was a lot of collaborating information we had to compare against his statements.
And the corroboration that you got from Jason dealt with essentially where things happened, right?
Yes.
But Jason's discussions essentially about the plans with Rochelle, in many ways, were a lot more consist of statements. It's a lot harder to find physical proof to corroborate what Jason said with Rochelle, right?
Yes.
At first glance, what Mr. Wells did there may not seem like much, but this is a potent part of the trial. He manages to get the investigator to admit in a roundabout manner that he accepts what Jason Arrant says as the truth. The reason this is a critical point is because the day prior, Mr. Wells had utterly destroyed Jason's credibility during cross-examination. Before we look at Jason's cross, though, there is one part of his direct examination by the prosecution that I would like to highlight. This excerpt coming up is in regards to why Jason lied to police in his multiple interviews with them before he admitted to what he classifies as the truth. Pay attention to Jason's words, because the defense attorney sure was.
And then partway through the interview, did you change?
Yes, I did.
And what did you tell him then?
It was basically a half-truth.
And why did you tell him?
Again, I was still trying to trying to salvage what was rapidly becoming the rest of my life.
I was still trying to salvage what was rapidly becoming the rest of my life. Like a shark to blood, Mr. Wells latches onto this statement and works tirelessly to not only destroy Jason's credibility, but to shed light on the fact that he is a sexual predator.
When you make up your lies, are they all on the fly, or do you think about some of them ahead of time?
Well, most of them were on the fly.
Most of them are on the fly. So you do think about some of them ahead of time?
I suppose so.
Do you think about lies that you were going to tell as you were trying to, how did you put it? Salvage what was going to remain of the rest of my life?
Some of them, yes.
You thought about lies to tell as you thought about how to salvage your life?
Yes.
This is a really brutal crime, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
You could do a lot of jail time.
Yes, I could. I'm sure I will.
And actually, you stand a pretty good chance if you went to trial and were convicted of not ever walking out of jail again, right?
Correct.
Mr. Wells will now spend around 15 minutes listing in detail all of the charges that lay against Jason, concluding that someone would normally face over 300 years in jail for these charges, but the plea deal that has been struck with the prosecution for Jason's testimony against Rochelle could get him out of jail much sooner.
You're the one that used the term salvage, right?
Yes.
You're the one that said that you were looking to do whatever you could to salvage the remainder of your life, right?
Yes.
You're the one that admitted that under all of these charges, you could go to prison for the rest of your life, right?
Yes.
You're the one that admitted that you could go to prison for the rest of your life and die in prison, never having again seen the light of day, right?
Yes.
And this deal actually salvages your life, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
You get out at 42 and you have a reasonable chance to do something. When you're a 25-year-old high school janitor Marine Corps dropout, maybe you could make a change, right?
Yes.
At 42, you might even still be young enough that you could still pick up teenage girls, couldn't you?
Argumentative, Your Honor. Objection.
It's argumentative.
At 42, you would be young enough that the difference in age between you and a teenage girl might be overcome by giving them booze and marijuana and cigarettes, right?
I don't think that's where I want to go with my life.
Well, not now.
No.
Well, let's talk about that for a little bit, because that's where you were in the summer of 2004, right?
It certainly was.
It certainly was. It certainly was. Rachelle Waterman at that time was 15 years old, right?
Yes.
You were 25.
I was 24.
24. Sorry. 24. Now, you've made pains throughout this whole deal, whenever you've talked with the police, to say that any sex between you and Rochelle occurred after she was 16, haven't you?
Yes.
You described in your direct testimony how you sent her an email on how to pose for you, right?
Yes.
And you got pictures in return.
Yes, I did.
And those pictures were taken on July 12th, weren't they?
I don't recall.
That you wouldn't dispute that date, would you?
I guess not.
And if those pictures were taken on July 15th, or I'm sorry, July 12th or thereabouts, Rochelle would have been 15 years old at that time, right?
Yes, she would.
So, actually, you don't have any child porn charges up here, do you?
No, I don't.
You don't have any exploitation of a minor charges up here, do you?
No, I don't. So why are we discussing it?
Because you haven't been charged with that as part of your plea bargain, right?
No.
You're not going to get charged with that, are you?
I don't think so.
You ever heard the term, the first to squeal gets the deal?
No.
You were the first to squeal, though, in this case, weren't you?
Yes.
State showed a bunch of letters that you wrote, and we'll talk with those letters in due time. But you wrote all these letters to Rochelle, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
You poured out your heart to her, right?
Yes.
You made all these promises. You're the only one for me, and I love you, and I can't wait to be around you, and we'll spend our lives together and all of this, right?
Yes.
You just sacrificed her so that you could salvage the rest of your life.
Objection argumentative.
It is. Objection sustained.
And now, to drive it home, Mr. Wells goes through every little lie that Jason told after the murder and meticulously picks them apart, detail by detail, to create unease around his version of the truth.
If she wanted her mom dead, wouldn't it have been easier if she gave you a key?
It would have been easier, yes.
There'd be no signs of forced entry if you got the key.
Yes.
Right?
I don't claim to be an expert on planning a murder.
You have more experience than anybody in the courtroom.
Objection argumentative.
Please refrain.
Part of your plea bargain involves you telling what you told the police on that last occasion, right?
Yes.
If you don't tell them that plea bargain can be revoked, can't it?
As I understand it, yes.
And in fact, the judge may look at your involvement in this case, and even based on your testimony, she may choose to reject that plea bargain, right?
That could happen, yes.
You officially have not been sentenced, right?
I have not.
You have a vested interest in making sure that this jury believes that you're telling the truth, don't you?
Yes.
You have over 300 some odd years of prison on the one hand, or making this jury believe that you're telling the truth, right?
Yes.
And now, you're looking at spending maybe 17 years in a 6x8 cell instead of the rest of your life.
Yes, but there's no way I could have known that at the time. I'd never spoken to legal counsel, and I'd never been approached with a deal before I gave those details up.
But you knew that you might be able to salvage the rest of your life.
I knew it was a possibility.
It was a possibility. You didn't know how sweet it would be.
Well, I don't know if I would consider it sweet. Spend some time in a cell. It's not sweet.
17 years in a cell is better than the rest of your life, right?
It would be, yes.
You said, I went around to the side of the building so I could walk up the hill to the dumpster. And I hadn't gone more than about 10 steps, and someone grabbed me from behind, and I got a handful of my hair and pulled my neck back, and I felt a blade at my throat. He told me that if I didn't stay away from Rochelle, there was going to be another accident. And while he was talking to me, he was running the blade across my throat. Right?
Yes.
Was this something you made up on the fly, or was this something you planned out ahead of time?
Made it up on the fly.
To try and salvage the remainder of your life?
Made that clear, yes.
You didn't care about whether you killed her, did you?
Again, I did not kill her, and yes, I care.
Is this a funny subject?
No, it's not.
You're the one that's laughing. That's why I'm asking. Is this funny?
No, I'm just blown away by this. I don't know how many more times I can tell you that yes, I admit to this, that this was a fabrication. But telling me that I didn't care about her death is ludicrous.
Trooper McPherson goes through some other matters a little bit later on page 21. You tell him, I'm not lying on line 11, right?
Yes, I did.
And he says, you did lie. You even fabricated an assault. Right?
Yes.
And you say, I know, and I know that. And he says, okay. And you say, I know that destroys my credibility, but I'm not lying now.
Yes, but I was.
So even when you say you're not lying, you're lying.
On that occasion, yes.
On that occasion. Are you going to tell this jury, I know that destroys my credibility, but I'm not lying now?
I'm not. I would like to point out this is the first time I've been under oath.
So it makes a difference? You don't feel the need to tell the truth when you're not under oath?
I felt the need, but I didn't. I am now. I don't know how many more times I can make that clear to you.
And so you have even more lies throughout this interview that we're going to uncover, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you tell the troopers at that point, I know you have no reason to believe me now. I understand that.
Yes.
And part of the reason that you're doing that is because you want to salvage the remainder of your life, right?
Yes.
If Mr. Pierce testified that actually you were really belligerent and refused to leave and kept trying to separate him from Rochelle. That would differ from your testimony, wouldn't it?
That would, but that's not what
And that would be different in the details, wouldn't it?
It would be different.
Now, let me ask you something. Who is trying to salvage the remainder of their life? You or Mr. Pierce?
Objection.
I am.
Argumentative.
It goes absolutely to bias, Your Honor.
Plus.
It's overruled.
Okay. You are. And so if the testimony of Chief C or Mr. Pierce was that you left, that would be different than yours, right?
Yes, it would.
Now, again, who's trying to salvage the remainder of their life? You or Chief C?
Myself. I believe we've covered that many times now.
Who's trying to salvage the remainder of their life? You or Mr. Pierce?
Me.
Okay. If the testimony of the Pierces did not cover any phone call, their testimony would differ from yours, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
Let me ask you this. You can probably figure out where I'm going. Are the Pierces trying to salvage the rest of their lives to the best of your knowledge?
No.
Do they have anything to gain one way or another by their testimony?
No.
Who has something to gain by their testimony in this case, you or the Pierces?
I would.
I probably don't need to ask you, but I'll ask you just in case to make sure that we don't leave any stone unturned. Between you and Amanda Voslo, you're the one that's trying to salvage the remainder of your life, right?
Yes.
How about Ian Lindrum? You know Ian.
Yes.
You don't like Ian, do you?
No. It's pretty mutual.
If Ian says, I didn't see any difference, that would be different from your testimony, right?
Yes, it would.
Ian's not trying to salvage the remainder of his life, is he?
Just Rochelle's.
He's not trying to salvage the remainder of his life, is he?
No, he's not.
How about John Wilburn? You know him, don't you?
Absolutely.
You gave him porn, didn't you, to deliver messages to Rochelle, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Do you think it's appropriate for a 25-year-old man to give a 14-year-old boy hardcore pornography?
He asked.
My question is, do you think it's appropriate for a 25-year-old man to give a 14-year-old boy hardcore pornography?
No. Is that one of my charges?
I asked if it was appropriate.
And I said no.
If Mr. Wilburn said he saw no difference in Rochelle's demeanor in the months before her mother's death, that would differ from your testimony, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
And because it differs from your testimony, one of the things the jury can do in deciding who is telling the truth is figure out who has motivation to lie, right?
They certainly could.
And out of the two of you, between you and John Wilburn, you are trying to salvage the remainder of your life, right?
Yes, I am. And I'm glad I've given you such a fun phrase to play with.
You're the one that said it. You're the one that said it. Brian's getting the maximum, facing the maximum possible punishment, right?
Yes, he is.
And, well, we know that you're trying to salvage the remainder of your life, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember getting a phone call from Rochelle that made you go grab your rifle?
Yes.
And you told Brian at that time that you were going to kill Laurie Waterman, right?
Yes.
And Brian talked you out of it, right?
Yes, he did.
Isn't that the phone call where Rochelle said, you know, we really, I don't think, should be involved as boyfriend and girlfriend anymore?
No.
Isn't that the phone call where she decided to break up your relationship?
No.
You're not going to admit that that happened, are you?
It didn't happen.
My question is, you would not say that that happened, would you?
No, I wouldn't.
Because if it did happen, it casts a lot of doubt on your story, doesn't it?
It would.
And you have a vested interest in this jury believing your story. I think we've already covered that, right?
Yes.
I don't have any other questions.
Near the end of the trial, the defense presents Dr. Marty Bayer as an expert psychologist. Dr. Bayer refers to multiple MRI studies that show how a teenage brain cannot process information in the same way an adult brain does. When a teenager is presented with images of a person that they know, the MRI would show that the young person's amygdala, the part of the brain that controls emotional response, would become active, whereas in an adult's brain, the frontal cortex would become active, and this is the part that controls cognitive function. The doctor would testify that her expert opinion is that Rochelle did have major tensions with her mother, but would use her friends, including Brian and Jason, to vent these frustrations in a way that made sense to her. Claiming abuse, although it may not have been happening in actuality, would be a way for her to rationalize the emotional pain that she was feeling to others. This emotional pain was constructed from multiple factors: sexual assault that her parents didn't know about, living on an isolated island away from the perceived world, and an overbearing, strict religious mother who would combat her constantly on her views, would all play together to form Rochelle's emotional pain. Pain that she would blame on her parents, her mother specifically, and a pain that she would convey to others as physical abuse. Her opinion is that Rochelle's venting to Jason and Brian was nothing more than a teenager needing someone to listen to them, not a call to murder. After 7 days of deliberation, the jury gathers to read their verdict.
Your message reads that we are unable to reach a decision on all counts. I'm fully aware that you have been deliberating for 7 days, not so much as leaving for lunch, but the law does require that I at least inquire as to whether there might be some chance of forward movement, and in doing that, let me refer to Instruction 43. Do you feel that there's any potential of that further deliberations might be beneficial? And again, I don't want to know what's been going on in the course of your deliberations, but rather whether it does appear hopeless.
It's hopeless at this point. Not regards to numbers or quantity, but the proceeding of deliberation has come to the point where it's at an impasse. We cannot produce a unanimous vote with any further deliberation.
Right. Would the other members of the jury agree with that assessment? Yes. All right, I see nods all around.
This case was classed as a mistrial and rescheduled for a later date. In the coming trial that took place in 2011, Jason would refuse to testify, but Brian once again took to the stand. Rochelle was charged during this trial of criminally negligent homicide and sentenced to 3 years in jail. Jason pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, and with his plea deal was sentenced to 50 years in prison, eligible for parole after 16. Brian Radel pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to 99 years in prison, but with good behavior could be released after 33. My time with this case made me think quite a lot on how media can control my judgments. When I first decided to make this video, I found myself predispositioned to believe that Rochelle was a cold-blooded murderer, a monster that ordered a hit on her mother without a second thought, and that these two homicidal maniacs were madly in love with her, willing to do her every bidding. But by the end of the trial, I found it to be a much more nuanced situation than I initially suspected. Who would have thought, hey? It's very rarely black and white, is it? As an example, when I was reviewing the footage, at times I found myself wishing that Brian had not gotten caught up with Jason, not only for the obvious reason that an innocent woman would still be alive, but maybe he could have finished his video game. Maybe he could have done something productive with his life. I also surprisingly found myself more impressed with Mr. Wells' defense than I thought I would. At the start of the case, I found his gruff approach to questioning so very abrupt that I could barely get through listening to his cross-examinations in one sitting. Yet as the case went on, whether one's opinion rests in his argument or not, and believe me, my personal opinion would fluctuate at times, it became clear to me that there was a particular method to his madness. I've seen lawyers before take the attack approach. They yell and accuse, and more often than not, I find myself rolling my eyes as it never seems to quite land where I think they're trying to aim. But with Mr. Wells it was different. He had refined his abrasive approach to a point where it was controlled, and this would prove effective as at times he even rattled hardened investigators, let alone Jason, who never stood a chance. Mr. Wells would weave and wind around complicated lines of questioning that would confuse even the judge at times. But when he managed to wrap it all together, it really packed a punch. I'm not going to disclose my opinion on how I feel about the outcome of the case overall. I would prefer with these videos to place as little personal opinion into them as possible. I had the privilege to be able to watch the unedited footage and formulate my own opinion unaltered by someone else's thoughts. And I'd like for you to be able to have a similar experience if possible. I hope and aim for this to be an accurate representation of the key moments of the case overall. What I will leave you with though is a thank you for watching, and an even bigger thank you for everyone who has joined me on this content creation journey so far. It's an honor to be able to provide videos like this to you, and it's inspiring to know that these moments, stories, cases, and people that I find fascinating and haunting, that there is someone out there like yourself, a real person on the other side of the screen who appreciates me putting it together. So with that all said, take it easy, and I'll catch you on the next one.